Hi guys, in today's video I want to talk about emotional eating. This is a massive topic obviously, and it's one that I've been scared to talk about in the past, but with probably about a third of my clients, emotional eating is a really big obstacle in the way of their weight loss goals. So it's something that I feel like I really need to tackle, and to tackle it well. So this is my first attempt at kind of trying to put all of that information into one place, and giving you an overview of how I think we need to approach emotional eating, and what I think are the solutions, what I think you can do. I'm basing a lot of this off of my experience with clients, for a lot of reading with it, but also from my own personal experience with this. I struggled with a lot of eating disorders, disordered eating, emotional eating, binge eating, all the way through my teens. I do want to make a separate video talking about my story, for those of you who are interested. I'm not a psychologist. I don't specialize in this, but I do see it so much in my work. And as somebody who's worked in the health and fitness industry for 8 years now, I think that basically everyone has some level of disordered eating. That it's just as simple as that. And we all need to address it on some level to feel better about how we eat and what we eat. Okay, so I'm going to crack on with the presentation if I can sort my camera out. So the first thing I would say is like stop trying to stop eating emotionally. People try really hard. They rely on willpower and they try to stop. But I don't think that's the long-term answer, just trying to resist it and trying to just fight it with willpower. I just don't think that's a long-term solution, and it doesn't deal with any of the underlying stuff, which hopefully I'm going to touch on in this video. There's deeper work that needs to be done, and ultimately emotional eating is always a symptom of something else. I also want to say, before we really get into this, that if any of this sounds patronizing, I really apologize. That's not what I'm trying to be. And I also realize there's degrees of this. For some of you, you might be in a really bad place and have some really heavy shit going on. And some of you might be in a really good place in your life, and you might think that, I'm just assuming that you must have deep-seated problems, and you probably don't, right? There's a whole degree of this, but the emotional eating is still a problem. So we still need to understand, we need to look at all the different ways that we could possibly approach it. So the mainstream advice is kind of just distract yourself, or go for a walk, or tidy your house, clean your house, or don't keep it in the house. It's all based on just like avoidance, and just by the time you've already got to the point where you're like craving to eat something and like comfort yourself with food, it's just relying on willpower to just not do it, or to try and like divert your attention to something else. And I think this is a really superficial way of approaching it, and we need to dive a little bit deeper than this. From my perspective, I think there are 4 things that can help, and I'm going to go into them in varying degrees in this presentation. First of all, exploring and understanding the emotional issue. Second of all, addressing how we grew up around food and messages from our parents. I think that's a big one. Addressing habits, which isn't necessarily emotional, but it's definitely something that we need to address to see if we can get any low-hanging fruit there that kind of solves the problem for us. And understanding nutrition, calories, and how it actually works. And that's probably my most unconventional piece of advice, because most people are like into, intuitive eating and listening to yourself, and like you don't need to understand this stuff in order to and understanding calories is just gonna, or talking about calories is just going to make you more disordered. I think that is a massive logical fallacy, and I'm going to talk about why today. So first of all, understanding the emotions involved. There's always a reason why. There's always something under emotional eating, right? It's not just the eating isn't the problem, it's a symptom of the problem. So the first thing, like sort of paradigm shift I want to offer is like to not hate the emotional eating. Like, it's helped you cope. It's been our coping mechanism up until this point in your life. And I think this is a really important thing to appreciate. Like, a little bit of gratitude here, a little bit of like just seeing it in a different way, instead of being like, oh, I hate that I do this emotional eating. I hate that I feel this way. I wish I wasn't like this. It shouldn't be like this. For a moment, just step back and think, you know, all the stress and all the problems that you've had in your life, food has always been there to comfort you. And it's a way of relieving stress. It's a way of distracting yourself from whatever else is going on in your life. Just in the same way that, you know, for an alcoholic, like I'm not saying that it is an addiction in the same way, but like somebody who does struggle with something like alcohol or substance abuse or like anything else, like it's there because it helps us cope with difficult situations or difficult emotions. So first of all, you can't just get rid of it and just expect to like cope with whatever it is that causes the emotional eating or triggers the emotional eating, because that's the only coping mechanism you have. That's the only way to relieve stress or whatever else that you have. But also just understand and appreciate the role that it's played in your life, because it has helped you to deal with or hide from negative emotions and relieve stress and be able to cope with life and move on and go on to the next day. So it has had a positive role. We definitely want to find better ways of doing it that won't impact your health, but it still had an important role in your life for one reason or another. Then secondly, like, what do you really need, right? Take a moment to think, like, what do you really need? And everyone always finds this really hard to answer. And maybe my question's wrong, but it's just something to think about. Like, emotional eating is almost always, and I would go as far as to say always, a coping mechanism for unbearable negative emotion. And unbearable might be too strong a word for some of you, but like difficult negative emotion, like it might be that, like, this is a list, you know, non-comprehensive list of boredom, loneliness, sadness, stress, anger, frustration. It might be it might be something a lot milder than those feelings, but it's still a way of relieving a negative feeling or emotion. So just trying to get rid of the emotional eating, just getting rid of the behavior, is just trying to get rid of the symptom. It's like trying to get like if you're dehydrated and you have a headache, just trying to get rid of the headache only gets rid of the symptom. It doesn't actually get rid of the problem, the deeper problem, that you're dehydrated. So you really do need to dig into this, like, what is actually going on and what do you actually need that's causing you to overeat? And obviously these things are all tied to, like, you know, our childhoods and how we grew up around food, and not all of us turn to food for comfort, but there is something that needs comforting here. So really dig into, like, what are you actually feeling? Like, what's causing you to then crave food and want to overeat or eat emotionally? There's an exercise I really like called RAIN. If you Google Tara Brach, BRACH, RAIN, she has some guided meditations on the reign of self-compassion, right? And just putting it out there, right? Tara Brach is very hippy dippy, like very spiritual and stuff. But she's like my favorite person. Like, she's the most kind of like down to earth of those kind of like hippy dippy types of people. So like, I really like some of her stuff. And I think that this particular exercise is really, really useful, actually. If you it has helped me at times, and if you gravitate towards that kind of thing at all, then this might help you. But basically, RAIN is an acronym for recognize, accept, investigate, and nurture. And that's just basically this. It's like, first of all, recognizing that you're feeling that way, right? A lot of us, what like they say in Buddhism, and what like Tara Brach says, is that like people fight that. They have they have a feeling and a craving and an urge, but then they fight that so hard, and they're like, it shouldn't be this way, and I don't want to feel it, and trying to like la. And like, the first step is to like recognize what you're actually feeling, like recognize and really like explore, you know, what that feels like to be having this craving, and really sort of like let it in rather than trying to push it away. and to accept it, to accept this is how I'm feeling, and this it's maybe, rather than focusing on how it should be, just focusing on how it is. Like, this is how it is, and this is how I feel, and I need to accept that's how I feel right now. Like it or not, this is how I feel. And investigate it, like investigate what it feels like and what's coming up and all of that kind of stuff. And then nurture, and the nurture stage is asking yourself, what do you really need? Like, what's really going on? With one particular client, we just found that she just needed to relax, and that was the only thing that she could think of that was like her go-to to relax. And she actually just discovered that, actually maybe playing a bit of piano that she hasn't done for years, she's a good pianist, like she never goes back to her music to to relax. For some of you, it might be watching Netflix. For some of you, it might be going for a walk. For some of you, it might be reading a book. But maybe it's just an opportunity. You're craving an opportunity to relax. Maybe it's not a heavy emotion, but it's a craving, an opportunity to relax and treat yourself. Is there something else you can do? A face mask, or like a nice facial scrub, or a nice shower, like something that's actually going to make you feel better. Because I think I've got a slide in here later on. Like, if hunger isn't the problem, food probably isn't the solution. And if you just feel like you want to treat yourself, and then you treat yourself to something, like afterwards, you've got to then deal with like the fact that, you might have the guilt, but the fact that it's detracting you from your long-term goals, and that's difficult to cope with. And it's that conflict inside yourself. So this is the sort of thing that I worry is going to sound really, really patronizing. But if you're having emotional eating because of certain problems in your life, like, too much stress, or like a stressful relationship, or marital problems, or like work is really unsatisfying, you hate your work or whatever, like this might not resonate with a lot of you. But if there are areas of your life that need attention, like, food isn't going to solve it, but also just the emotional eating is just helping you cope with that stuff. So you need to fix that stuff first. And then a lot of the time, the emotional eating will get better on its own. And that's something that I found with my own, my life was an absolute mess in my teens and 20s. And as I made a better life for myself and improved my circumstances, like, the emotional eating did just disappear. So again, sorry if that sounds patronizing, but for some of you that might be relevant. Again, so if hunger isn't the problem, food probably isn't the answer. It's not going to solve your problem, and that's something worth thinking about. I know that doesn't take away the urge to overeat, but it's worth thinking about when you're having the craving to overeat. It's just thinking like, wait, this is just going to give me a whole bunch of new problems. It's not going to actually solve any of my problems. Ultimately, emotional eating isn't the problem and shouldn't be the focus. It's a symptom of the problem. So it's really important to dig into what is the actual problem. And it might be small, it might be big, but it's really important to dig into it. And you need to understand and deal with the emotional problems that are arising, not the emotional eating. That's not what you need to actually focus on. You need to focus on the emotional problems. You need to actually deal with them. That's really, really important part of this. CBT for emotional eating. I'm not going to go into this in too much detail because I have a whole other video on that, but I have an exercise for you that you can do, CBT for emotional eating, or just for weight loss in general, and the cognitive distortions and some examples that I've heard from clients that exist. So here's a list of some cognitive distortions here. I won't go through them in too much detail because I've done a whole other video on this, but like catastrophizing and thinking things are the end of the world, or labeling yourself as like lazy, or discounting positives. I see this all the time, like, oh, that kilo, that was just a fluke, or like whatever. Dichotomous thinking around food, negative thinking, negative filtering, shoulds, blaming your parents, which we're going to talk about in a minute. Like, there's a lot of cognitive distortions that come up for people around food and weight loss, and around negative eating. So that's something worth digging into. Slightly different from the emotional eating, but it can be contributing. So it can be really helpful for those of you that struggle with emotional eating. So back to slideshow, addressing messaging from our parents. I think this is a really, really important one for most of us, because those of us who are millennials, which is most of us, we got some pretty messed up and heavy-handed messages from our parents, and a lot of like really mixed messages from our parents. And I think this is a really important thing for us to address seriously, because they didn't have a clue what they were doing. And they, certainly as I've become a parent, I grew up thinking that adults, they must know what life is about, and they must have passed a special course. But most adults in the world just don't have a bloody clue what they're doing, and they're making it all up as they go along. I certainly am. So that's kind of given me a bit more compassion for my parents, for sure. But our parents' generation, like the baby boomers, right? They were stuck between two generations, two worlds, two realities. They were stuck between this like war child syndrome of like their parents who, like, my grandparents grew up in like World War II, London, like extreme poverty, like families of like 13 kids, Roman Catholics, like you name it, like all of they just had such a those parents, like our grandparents, most of you will know that still, they have such a scarcity mindset around food, and like you've got to be eating enough, and like, are you eating enough? They're so worried that you're not eating enough, because that was the problem in their time. And they just can't compute that nowadays there's so much abundance that actually the opposite is true. Being overweight is normally the problem, and preventing kids from overeating is actually the problem. Preventing like yourself from overeating is actually the problem. They have this extreme fear of any waste, so they'll sort of like, clean your plate syndrome. They always want to get their money's worth. Like they feel like any sort of waste is like a terrible, terrible, terrible thing. They always soothed us with food. We bumped our head, oh, come and have like some chocolate. And then they'd tell us that food was bad, like that, oh, this is fattening and that's fattening. And they like I said, they didn't have a Scooby-Doo what they were doing. A lot of them did really silly diets, like our mums in particular, through the 1980s and 90s. God, they just did the most crazy shit, like Atkins and like 500 calorie diets and size 0 diets. That was all the rage back then, because they were just kind of like getting into this age where everyone's putting on weight, which wasn't a problem in the past, and they just came up with these crazy solutions to it. And we didn't really have the same understanding around nutrition and how to lose weight that we do now. So most of us grew up around mums in particular who were just all over the shop with food. Undereating, overeating, binge eating, doing crash diets, and it just gave us a horrible understanding of how diets work, and that kind of diet culture that people talk about. They had very little nuance, and most of them still have very little nuance around food or understanding of nutrition. They're very all or nothing. They're very they do everything to extremes, and many of them have very bad body image themselves, and they say that to us. They tell us how, my mother certainly told me how she was fat and disgusting and she hated her body, and that's really strong messaging for a child to grow up with. But what I want to say here is not to assign blame, but just understand that this is, what most of us grew up with, and what a lot of our parents were dealing with as well. And I think it's really important to remember that our generation is unique in history in that we are overwhelmed with abundance, but we're also overwhelmed with information. Anyone can make a social media post and say anything, right? It can be a total lie, a total fake news, right? And there's a lot of that floating around, and it has been floating around for a really long time. And before that, it was magazines. We were just so inundated with like, this is how to lose weight. No, this is how to lose weight. No, carbs are bad for you. No, sugar's bad for you. No, salt's bad for you. No, saturated fats. And like, we're just so overwhelmed by this information, and we just completely confused about what is actually true. But we're also completely overwhelmed by abundance. We have so much food, and it's so cheap and so readily available, and so much of it is so palatable. And this has never been a problem throughout all of human history. The opposite has been a problem. So this is something we have to understand, that this is something that our generation has to deal with, and future generations will have to deal with, because we're not wired for this. We've evolved for a totally different set of circumstances around food. So this is going to be a really quick one, addressing habits. I don't have too much to say about this. I just really recommend the book Atomic Habits, because some of your emotional eating might not actually be emotional eating, and it's actually just habits. And I really, really, really recommend the book Atomic Habits for this. It just really has so many insights, like, wow, that's really, I hadn't thought of that, and a really great way of just framing everything. But I do want to say that when we're changing habits is hard. So we need to change habits incrementally. And that's what we're doing on this program. And that's what Atomic Habits talks about, is how to make it as painless as possible, how to make it as easy as possible. So we're doing things like setting up your anchor points based on when you want to eat, figuring out how much is in the food you like to eat, so that it gets easier those changes are easier and less painless to make. So if I give you a meal plan with like, this is what you're going to eat today, and then tomorrow you have to eat off a different meal plan, it's so tedious and so hard to completely overhaul your diet. So we're not overhauling anything. We're making small incremental changes that are going to compound over time. Okay, so that was a quick one. For understanding nutrition and calories. This is also going to be relatively quick. This is very counterintuitive to most people, and most people think that you should just intuitively know how to eat, and if you just tune into your body, it will all be fine. But I don't see the reason why we can't do both. I don't understand why we can't listen to our hunger signals and listen to our bodies, but we can also learn about the science behind it, the science of nutrition, the science of energy balance. We know so much about this now. We still have lots and lots of questions, but we know so much, and it's really quite simple. And most trainers and nutritionists learn this stuff within the first few hours of their course, and it's not that complicated. And you can understand it too. And what I find with clients is when they understand how calories work, and when they understand how a calorie deficit works, and when they understand how nutrition works and how it doesn't have to be like, things aren't going to kill you, it takes away a lot of the fear around food and a lot of the drama that a lot of people have kind of in their heads. And it actually takes away a lot of, I know there's that myth that counting calories will give you an eating disorder and things like that. But I've actually found that with most of my clients, with all of my clients actually, that it calms people down. It makes them understand it. And it's like, once you know it, you can't unknow it. You can't go back to doing a 600 calorie diet when you know that your needs are actually much, much higher, and you just need to be in a moderate deficit. And understanding that there's just 200 calories in, like, I don't know, 2 chocolate covered Oreos is just, oh, okay. Or 250 calories in a Magnum or in a Snickers bar. Like, it kind of just puts things in context. Okay, I need like 2,000 calories a day to maintain my weight. Okay, so it's not that much. It's not that bad. That's not going to kill me. So understanding the science behind it and the numbers behind it can really help people. So understand the facts that calories are just your energetic needs, right? It's just a unit of measurement, just like a centimeter or a kilometer or a kilogram. It's not this big scary thing. Another fact, this is a list of facts. We are not built for this level of abundance and availability and access for food. We have not evolved for this. And that is a fact. And so it creates problems having this abundance and this level of availability. So we have to learn how to navigate this environment. And we're wired to, just to expand on that a little bit, we are wired to always be in the search of food, to always eat as much as we possibly can, because there might not be food tomorrow. We're wired to eat things that are more palatable, because it's a sign that it's either healthier for us or that it's not gone off, right? We're wired towards like tastier foods, but we're also wired towards things that have fat and sugar in them because they're very calorie dense, and we're wired to want to get calorie dense foods in. If you think, about us eating, like hunter-gatherers, gathering all their berries and sticks and stuff, like they're getting very little nutritional value from that and not very few calories. But then when they kill a wildebeest or something, they get lots of fat and lots of calories in a short amount of time. So we are actually wired to look for the more calorie dense foods, and there's nothing wrong with you because of that. But it doesn't translate to this level of abundance and availability. It only translates to when there's scarcity and when there's not enough. We're always wired to make sure that we survive that kind of like level of that period of scarcity. There's nothing wrong with you that you crave or enjoy certain foods, especially the high fat, high calorie stuff. It's normal that you crave that stuff. And there's a lot of people telling you that, oh, it's because your metabolism needs to be rebalanced. Your metabolism is out of whack, or your hormones are out of whack. That's why you crave something sweet and a coffee in the afternoon. No, like, you crave something sweet, you're supposed to. There's nothing wrong with you. Understanding that nutrition is important, but clean eating is not. And that comes back to that 80-20 rule of flexible dieting. If you're getting 80% of your foods from like whole unprocessed foods, that's enough. You can have like the burger and the Snickers and the Magnum and all that stuff. It's not gonna negatively impact your health if you have it in small portions. And eating bad or processed foods is totally fine in certain amounts. Okay, so again, that 80-20 rule, the dose makes the poison. It's not gonna make you gain weight, or there's nothing inherently wrong with those foods. You just have to fit them into the overall calorie balance, but also making sure you're getting enough nutrients, and that's it. And it's important to address all or nothing thinking around food. This idea there's good and bad foods. And that's where we introduce flexible dieting and the 80-20 rule. And it's really important to accept that it cannot be perfect. You're not going to do a diet with me or with anyone else and it's going to be perfect from here on out. You have to accept that that there are going to be days where you're not going to be able to eat how you want to eat, or different things are going to be available and it's going to mess you up. That's a really important part of this. And that food is more than just fuel. Food is also for celebration. It's for gathering with friends and family. It's for enjoying. It's a really strong cultural thing. It's so much more than just fuel. And accepting that all of these things are true, and two different things can be true at the same time, is really, really important. That's the end of my presentation. If you're still here, thank you very much for listening, because I know this was a long one, but emotional eating is obviously a very big topic. So I really hope you found this useful. This was just my first attempt at this, so I hope to make it more concise or more useful for you. Please let me know what comes up from this, what appeals to you, what doesn't, and I will do my best to help you figure out whatever it is that's getting in the way of your emotional eating.